Welcome to the Author's Edge radio show with Guy L. Freer. Each week on their show, they help authors create books that transform our lives and imaginations. Through radio excellence, they create a unique community resource, one that promotes, connects, and fosters a sense of well-being. They serve listeners by providing outlets for their creative skills and energies, and they help them flourish in the competitive marketplace. Their weekly show provides intros, writing spotlights, helps you in promoting your book, your writing, your publishing, your marketing tidbits, and much more. Okay, audience, here's the Author's Edge radio show with Guy L. Freer.
And we're back. Welcome to Author's Edge. Join us for lively conversations with writers, publishers, songwriters, illustrators, and artists, diving into the art of storytelling. Catch us every Saturday at 8 a.m. and Sunday at 7 a.m. on KWRH FM 929 and KXOK FM 1029, or stream online at KXOK102.com. KWRH929.com, and via free apps, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and TuneIn. The show also airs nationwide Monday to Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. on the My Genre Radio Network. Missed an episode? Find us anytime on SoundCloud, YouTube, or at authorsedge.org. Now that's authorsedge.org. And welcome back to our studio. And it's so great to be here with Mark. And with my hubby, Ralph, also my driver. He keeps me awake. And we're here at Author's Edge. I am your host, Gael Freer. And today we have an exciting guest joining us, Chris Nafziger. Did I say it right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Okay. Yay! Chris is a historian and writer who studies the built environment of St. Louis. He shares his explorations through his blog, St. Louis Patina, and contributes regularly to St. Louis Magazine. His work often centers on the German-American brewing heritage of the city, and he did not bring me any beer, including the Lemp and Anheuser-Busch families. His latest book, Adam Lemp and the Western Brewery, tells the story of the man who founded one of the St. Louis most influential breweries, a name still etched into the gateway city's history. The backstory is what we're going to start with. Every city hides a few love stories. Some people fall for skylines, others for strangers. Chris, he fell for bricks. Let's find out how that happened.
Well, yeah, so I grew up in St. Louis, out in St. Louis County, and the city was always this place that was about 20 miles away from where I lived. And, I came down to the city on the weekends, and, it was still kind of this place that was a long ways away. I didn't have a car, obviously, when I was young. And I moved away from college, and I moved away for grad school. And then I came back after grad school, and I moved to the city, and I realized that, this place that was around me was built out of brick, and
mind you, beautiful brick.
And I think, the image of the Midwest, which St. Louis is very much a part of the Midwest, is that everything's just sort of made out of wood, right? And it's just sort of like this, image of like, the Wizard of Oz, right? It's just everything gets blown away by, minor winds, right? But in reality, St. Louis is this beautiful brick and, granite city, from like Elephant Rocks. And in reality, the city is totally different than this image that, people have it outside of the city. And I fell in love with this brick city where everything is just very ornamental. And even just the most simple houses have a lot of, artfulness to it, even, just
and the ornateness.
Yeah. Even just like the little 1-story houses, built for the working person, was really, these bungalows were working person's palaces, I call them.
Yes.
And I think that's what's great. The mansions of the Central West End are wonderful, right? But I feel like they don't need a lot of attention. Everybody knows that, Central West End has beautiful houses, but I love the houses of Dutchtown. Dutchtown has just as beautiful houses as the Central West End. Even a neighborhood like St. Louis Place, which maybe a lot of people don't even know.
The neighborhoods around the studio.
Yeah.
I love these brick homes right in this neighborhood here. Driving on my way to St. Louis, when I come up from Poplar Bluff to on Arsenal, which is where we're located. Okay, there are so many just plain pretty brick homes with. I especially like the ones that they're two homes, but the doorways are angled in.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I just love the way they just angled in, and then they have the corniches up on top. They're just gorgeous.
Well, I think you bring up a very good point. Those houses with the angled doorways, those are, 2-family flats, and, the 4-family flats, which there's, thousands of those. Even apartment buildings have the same amount of panache as single family houses. Nobody doesn't get a great, beautiful building in historic St. Louis.
Yes.
Nowadays you kind of see a lot of apartment buildings and they're kind of drab and boring. But back in, the 19th and early 20th centuries in St. Louis, everybody got a great, beautiful building to live in, regardless if it was an apartment building or a mansion.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit about your educational and professional background.
So my background is in art history, and that was why, my BA was in art history. And then I went away to grad school, and my master's is in museum studies. And, St. Louis is almost like an open air museum. And also, had emphasis in Renaissance and early modern painting, sculpture, and architecture. And, I loved going to Italy and France and Germany as much as possible.
So now you do know that my name is French.
Yeah, France is amazing. France is actually the most recent country I finally got to back in 2022, and Paris is amazing. And
I was born there.
Oh, no kidding! Wow. I'm horrible at pronouncing arrondissement. Which one?
Arrondissement.
Oh, that's how you pronounce it correctly. Which number of when?
I was born in Paris.
Okay, you don't know which number.
Well, Paris is number 1. It's the first arrondissement.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because it's
Right.
1, and then it goes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Right.
7, 8, 9.
So you're born on the first one.
I was born in the first one.
Wow.
I was born. Well, I was born in the American Army Hospital.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes. As a
Oh.
matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Sophia Lorenz was in there also at the same time that my mother was giving birth to me.
No kidding.
My mother just likes to remind me of that every so often.
So, having that background in, European art, it allows me to appreciate and then kind of pass on that appreciation of just how rich and backed with just deep history St. Louis's architecture is. You can just walk around the streets of St. Louis and just see, hey, that's inspired by French Parisian architecture, the Second Empire style, for example.
Right. Well, St. Louis was named after the king of France.
Right, exactly. Or you see Italianate architecture, and you can see the shades of the Renaissance in the architecture of other St. Louis buildings. Meanwhile, you can see in the brewery buildings of St. Louis the German heritage. It's like you walk down the street and you walk by Italy, you walk by France, you walk by Germany. If you're just walking down one street,
it's an international city in so very many ways architecturally.
Exactly. I think St. Louis should have much more pride than it does. I've lived in other major American metropolitan areas, including, Washington, D.C. and Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
I've never lived in a city where people are so down on the central city.
Yeah.
Baltimore, maybe there was a little bit of negativity towards the central city of Baltimore, but in Washington, D.C., there was a lot of pride in the center of the city. And, I think people should come down to the city. Soulard, I think people know that Central West End, Soulard are these great neighborhoods, but it's like, cross over Interstate 55 and there's Benton Park.
And Benton Park is absolutely amazing.
Exactly.
We drive through it all the time when we come here.
Yeah.
And Arsenal, it's beautiful.
Likewise, crossover Delmar.
Yes.
And you have Fountain Park, you have Lewis Place, you have the Academy neighborhood, you have the West End, which is a different neighborhood than the Central West End, and you have just as beautiful, if not sometimes more beautiful houses than the Central West End. And I think people need to realize that even if you don't live in the city of St. Louis, ultimately the health of the entire region, people's pocketbooks are affected by how the city of St. Louis is doing.
Yes.
So St. Louis Patina is about architecture and history, but it's also about the fact that we do live in a capitalist society, and this beautiful architecture is definitely something that we can use to improve the economy of St. Louis.
Yeah. Are there aspects of St. Louis past or architecture that you think people are often misunderstood? What were you going to say?
No, nothing. I was agreeing with Chris.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say something.
Not this time.
Not this time? Well, I wanted to make sure.
It's okay to disagree with me.
Oh no, whenever we drive through, the two of us are always saying we gawk. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've said to my husband, this, you can go, the stop sign, you can go.
Right.
We've stopped and we're gawking, and I said, go, go.
Right.
Or the light changes. You stopped, and we need to go because we're sitting there. We're looking at such really beautiful architecture, and the homes are, even the dilapidated ones are like gorgeous.
Exactly.
And we look at them and we're saying, well, all that really needs is a little TLC, and it.
Yeah, and the cost of living in St. Louis is something that is something that should really be played up. I mean, the number one reason I left the East Coast was the cost of living is insane.
Yes.
I think about my little brick bungalow, 1,100 square feet. I think about how much more expensive it would be in Washington, D.C. I would never in a million years be able to have afforded it. And here in St. Louis, it was easy for me to afford it. Now, for better or for worse, some people would argue for better, it probably would not be affordable for me now. But luckily, there still are neighborhoods in St. Louis where there are affordable houses, and that's kind of changing.
Yeah. So are there aspects of St. Louis past architecture that you think people have misunderstood?
Misunderstood. That's interesting. I think people misunderstand how lucky we are that we have this architecture. I think people regularly contact me from other parts of the country and even actually other parts of the world asking for me to give them tours of St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell me they can't believe St. Louis's architecture is so amazing. I'm not just saying that as a person who lives here. I've traveled to Europe, I've traveled to Mexico, Canada, and St. Louis's architecture punches well above its population weight. I mean, and it really is. It's totally different than much of the Midwest. It really is different. The amount of brick is totally different than most.
What are your favorite neighborhoods?
Not to offend anybody, I am a resident of Tower Grove East, so people are, I love my own neighborhood, obviously, but Dutchtown, and Dutchtown is also including Gravois Park and Benton Park West, the greater Dutchtown neighborhood, including Benton Park, that whole swath of South St. Louis.
I do like that.
South of Gravois, east of Grand, west of Broadway is just one of the most spectacular places in America. But I don't want to neglect North St. Louis. I find neighborhoods like St. Louis Place, which probably most people have never heard of, but that's west of North Florissant and east of Jefferson. That has some of the most fascinating, beautiful architecture in the city. The West End neighborhood, which I talked about before, which that's technically much of the Delmar Loop, north and east of Skinker and Delmar, is in the West End. That was the suburban part of St. Louis going back all the way to like the 1890s. That actually has lots of wood framed houses, country houses built by some of the wealthiest people in St. Louis, actually, neighborhoods. You go along streets like Cabanny. There's West Cabanny Place. There is this incredible street. Theodore Link had his own house that he designed himself. Theodore Link, of course, designed Union Station. And people have found them. It's amazing. I've been going up to that neighborhood for well over a decade, and there's been massive amounts of rehabbing going on. People would take the streetcar downtown from all these giant apartment complexes. Yeah, back in the day, people have talked about the West End, and they were talking about a much larger neighborhood than just what we now call the Central West End. Central West End was, obviously a very nice neighborhood, but it was much bigger area. It was this huge swath of the city.
So when they, that movie, was it St. Louis Fair?
Thinking about Meet Me in St. Louis.
Yeah, Meet Me in St. Louis. All right, where is that? Where is that taking place?
So I have to admit, I haven't seen that movie in its entirety. But I just know that there's the trolley song where
right.
And I'm going to have that song stuck in my head the rest of the day. So
clang, clang, clang comes the trolley.
I wouldn't call it a fun fact, but the actual house that the Meet Me in St. Louis house actually has been demolished. Yes. And it didn't look like the house in the movie, I might add. But the house that actually inspired Meet Me in St. Louis, that actually was demolished. So St. Louis has a mixed track record
for doing things doing silly things like that.
Yeah. So, but
I mean, what part of town was that? Would that have been?
It was in North St. Louis.
North St. Louis.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think people need to realize that St. Louis was once the 4th largest city in America.
Yes.
And I don't say that as like kind of, someone like with low self-esteem, like saying like, hey, did you know St. Louis used to be the 4th largest city in America? No, like
it
St.
really
Louis
was
the 4th largest city in America.
Right.
I like to say that I don't study local history. I study world history that happened in St. Louis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I mean, St. Louis is one of the few American cities that had the Olympics. And like you go to the Olympics website and they have a page on the St. Louis Olympics. I mean, now the St. Louis Olympics had kind of it was a kind of a goofy Olympics, but it still was a real Olympics. And it was right here in St. Louis. I mean, it's real Olympics.
It was there.
Yeah.
You're listening to Author's Edge, where stories get a little history and a lot of heart on KWRH929.com and KXOK102.com. And we're talking bricks, brews, and St. Louis tales with Chris Nafziger. Now, we've talked a little bit about St. Louis and the history and the bricks and whatnot. I want to talk a little bit about your book. Okay. How did your curiosity about the city's brewing history first begin?
Well, I think it obviously began because Anheuser-Busch has been such an amazing
brick building.
Yeah. And their marketing has always been amazing. I mean, I actually had the opportunity to see some of their archives, and Anheuser-Busch has always been a master at advertising.
Okay.
And their buildings are advertising.
Yes.
They could easily have just, started making very drab, very boring buildings a long time ago. But ever since, I would say the 1860s, they've been advertising with their buildings.
Now, how did Anheuser-Busch get to St. Louis? How did that?
So that's a long story. Eberhard Anheuser was actually a soap manufacturer. I actually wrote an article about how Eberhard Anheuser acquired what was known as the Bavarian Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
Eberhard Anheuser was enormously successful as a soap manufacturer.
Soap.
Yes. And soap is a big business.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though. People are much more interested in studying the beer industry. Soap is not nearly as exciting to people, which is interesting because in my research of the acquisition of the Bavarian Brewery by Eberhard Anheuser and a couple of his business partners, they bought it out of insolvency, basically, from this guy named Dr. Adam Hammer. Eberhard Anheuser's soap factory was enormous, and the Bavarian Brewery was minuscule compared to his soap factory. In fact, my research showed that for him to acquire the Bavarian brewery wouldn't have even made him sweat. I mean, basically,
Wow.
it was just minuscule, and it seems like he did it just sort of on a lark. I mean, he had lent some money to his friend, Dr. Hammer, and when it basically, Dr. Hammer defaulted on his loan to, Eberhard Anheuser. And next thing, Eberhard Anheuser knows, he owns this failed brewery called the Bavarian Brewery. And it kind of just seems like, he gave this brewery to his son-in-law, Adolphus Busch, and was like, hey, you need a living.
You need a job.
Let's just see if you can, I ended
do
up
something with this.
I ended up owning this brewery, which didn't cost me next to anything. His soap factory was I think 20 times larger than this brewery. And Adolphus was like, okay, I'll see if I can do something with this. And next thing he knows, he's doing really well with this brewery. And, obviously, eventually the brewery ends up dwarfing the soap factory. And the soap factory obviously doesn't exist anymore.
That is absolutely interesting. I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. And, I joke that we really should be writing about the soap industry in St. Louis because it seems to have been so much larger than the brewing industry in St. Louis back in the 1860s. But soap just doesn't sound as exciting as beer.
No. No. What is it about the Lemp family that continues to fascinate St. Louisians today?
Well, I think there's that tragic aspect to them. Anheuser-Busch very famously made it through Prohibition. That's
interesting.
Yeah,
in of itself.
Right. And now it's important to realize, and they openly talk about it
how did he make it through?
Well, basically turning to other business ventures. Now, it's very important to realize, and they openly admit it, that they did have to lay off a whole bunch of their employees. Anheuser-Busch did not continue at the same level of revenue as they did before Prohibition. They definitely, it hurt badly during Prohibition, but they made it through that. And it's also very important to realize there were other St. Louis brewers in the region who also survived Prohibition. Like they limped along, like the Falstaff Brewing Corporation run by the Grizzlies. They tottered along as well. And there were a couple of other minor breweries that also survived Prohibition. Mm-hmm. But I think what fascinates St. Louisans is how the Lemp Brewery just imploded. I mean, the infamous story about people, workers showing up for work one day and the brewery was padlocked and they discovered that's how they'd all been laid off. I think that, it was the Lemp Brewery was the second largest brewery in St. Louis.
Right.
And technically they were at one point larger than Anheuser-Busch. Now, that's a technicality. I mean, that was back in the 1870s. I mean, by the 1880s, Anheuser-Busch had blown the Lemp Brewery away. I hate to say, I think some people have this dark fascination with the suicides that several of the members of the family were involved with. I hate that aspect. I mean, it's part of their story, and you do have to talk about it to be to have
accurate,
to tell the complete accurate story.
Right.
But as I said recently, I'm more interested in their lives and not their deaths.
Yes.
Their lives are very interesting, particularly because they're so shrouded with the sands, the passage of time. Mm-hmm. And when you start digging into this, and there's ways to dig into their story, you start to discover their lives are very fascinating and very interesting, and oftentimes very kind of soap opera like. That's the best part.
All right. Well, we're going to get to that part in a minute. We're going to head to our commercial break. And this segment of Author's Edge is sponsored by Kanita Taylor, author of Dead Fed Said, available in paperback, Kindle, and Kindle Unlimited. Want to join Kanita in supporting Author's Edge? Become a show sponsor and connect with passionate readers and industry insiders while helping us spotlight great stories and creators. Why sponsor Author's Edge? Reach thousands of book lovers, boost visibilities and sales, target meaningful support, and trusted host endorsements. If you'd like to be a sponsor, call 573-714-1414 1352, and let's chat about how we can feature you on Author's Edge, where authors and readers meet. Also, if you're in Missouri, here's another great opportunity. Consider joining the Missouri Writers Guild, a statewide network founded in 1915 that supports writers through workshops, conferences, contests, local chapters, and professional resources. Members gain access to a strong literary community and tools to grow their craft. Joining is easy. Just visit MissouriWritersGuild.org and sign up online. Whether you're a seasoned author or just starting out, there's a place for you in the Guild. And now we're going to go to commercial break.
El Potro Restaurant and Market, located at 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland, offers the finest variety of Mexican and Central American groceries and goods. El Potro Restaurant serves authentic Mexican and Central American cuisine, including daily specials, not to mention the best horchata and tastiest margaritas in St. Louis. Open 7 days a week. El Potro, 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland.
Merton Services is a heating, air conditioning, and commercial refrigeration business that's been providing exceptional services in St. Louis for over 50 years, and they take pride in providing services and comfort to both residential and commercial customers. With the temperatures rising in the summer and dropping in the winter, your comfort and health can be put in jeopardy. With proper checks and maintenance, Mertens will keep your equipment in top shape. And when it's time to replace your furnace or your air conditioner, they've got you covered. With a wide range of options, Mertens has the perfect HVAC system to fit all of your needs. To find out how the good folks at Merton Services can help you with all of your HVAC needs, contact Merton Services at 314-845-1500. That's 314-845-1500. Merton Services, 314-845-1500.
The United States has a strong tradition of welcoming newcomers and refugees. The Welcome Corps is a new service opportunity for Americans inspired to welcome those seeking freedom and safety and in turn help strengthen their own communities. Welcome Corps is a public-private partnership that is inspired by what Americans represent to so many around the world, a beacon of hope and refuge. All it takes is a helping hand. Are you ready to learn more? Contact the International Institute of St. Louis at info@iistl.org or call 314-773-9090. That's info@iistl.org or call 314-773-9090.
And we're back. Welcome back to Author's Edge, the show where good stories never go flat. You're supposed to laugh. It was a joke. We're on KWRH929.com and KXOK102.com, chatting today with Chris Nafziger, whose work proves history pairs perfectly with a cold brew and a great tale. Hey, I worked hard on these.
Okay.
All right. I want to talk more about Adam and his story. Let's talk about Johanna Adam Lemp, and why do you think so much of his story remained untold until now?
Well, so Johann Adam Lemp, he was born in Germany in what was the Grand Duchy, I guess, of Hessen. So remember, Germany was not united in the German Empire until 1871. Mm-hmm. So it was fragmented in all these different little principalities. And so I was inspired by my friend Stephen Walker's book, Lemp: The Haunting History, which came out as a book back in the late 80s. And the book is phenomenal. It's a cult classic, I guess you call it. It's sold tens of thousands of copies over the years, and it's going to be a third edition soon. Anyway, I love that book, but I noticed that Stephen didn't talk a lot about Adam. John is an extremely common name in Germany. So most people who are named John just go by their middle name. That's why we just call him Adam Lemp. So I noticed that Stephen hadn't really talked a lot about Adam, the patriarch of the family. He really kind of goes in deep, starting with William Lemp Sr., his son. So I was like, Stephen, I think I might write a book about Adam. And he's like, that's a great idea, Chris. And so anyway, I found it very fascinating because after the Civil War in St. Louis, newspapers really explode in, publications and the number of them. And there's both English and German language ones. St. Louis had at least 3, if not 4 at one point, German language newspapers. But when you go before the Civil War, St. Louis was still a very literate city, but it was a lot more difficult to research people before the Civil War. Originally, you'll find this interesting, when I was younger, I thought that the history of St. Louis before the Civil War was boring. I don't know why I thought that. It was obviously not correct. I've actually discovered that this period before the Civil War in St. Louis is extremely fascinating because it's not heavily documented. So you have to dig a lot deeper. You have to be a lot more tenacious. You have to go to different sources that aren't traditional sources to find out more about these people. And so with Adam, I discovered, due to a tip from a friend, that the recorder of deeds, which is where you record nowadays, most people, that's where when you buy a house or sell a house.
Right.
Well, it's interesting. Nowadays, many people have heard of the FDIC, right? It insures your bank deposits and stuff like that.
Right.
Well, that didn't exist back then.
No.
So banks weren't trustworthy. So guess what? People took out loans with each other. And where did you record your loan? At the recorder of deeds. So Adam Lemp's life started to come together, sort of like the skeleton of his story, at the recorder of deeds. He actually would talk about his business and give clues to his business and his life in these deeds he would record when he took out loans with other people. So I found out information about his cave, when he first started using his cave, about his business partners, because they would co-sign loans that would be recorded at recorder deeds. I'd find out about how much money he was taking out in loans. And so those sort of became like the skeleton. And then those German language newspapers, those were sort of like the muscles that would kind of go on top of the skeleton. Then also I reached out to German archivists back in Hessen, in that German province, which these Germans obviously it's a very literate country, I guess is how you would put it.
Right.
And I could reach out to these churches and I could actually ask them to look up baptismal records. These city archives, actually, they had been doing their own research on these brewers like Adam Lemp. Also, I went to Cincinnati. The Lemps had always said in their histories of their own brewery that Adam had lived in Cincinnati. But it's very interesting because they also engage in lots of historical revisionism. They would write out portions of the story that were not favorable to them. They would also just sort of paper over things that were uncomfortable in their story. And it was very interesting that we started getting this picture of this guy and his friends and family that nobody had ever heard of before. And it was very exciting for me to discover this man who we knew nothing about. And all of a sudden we were starting to get this image, this fully fleshed out man, so to speak.
So what are some of the things that they used to paper over?
Well, without spoiling the exciting climax of the story, one thing that I will tell you guys about is that he was married 3 times.
Oh.
To a woman who had also been married twice before. It was her on her 3rd marriage when she married him as well. And this is actually very fascinating.
So did he have divorces? Or were they?
Well, that's a great story. He never.
So the dirt comes up.
So his first marriage, she died.
Okay.
And that was back in Germany. And obviously, you think about Germany nowadays as being, one of the largest economies in the world, one of the highest standards of living. But back in early 19th century German states, it wasn't that necessarily a great place to live in all parts of Germany. So, and standards of living weren't great anywhere in the world at the time. And he had 1 daughter with that first wife, which is important to the story. Then he married his second wife. He abandoned her along with William Lemp Sr., the famous guy who would later commit suicide in his house that many Lemp enthusiasts have heard about. He fled to America in 1836, and we have documentation of that in German archives.
Why did he abandon her?
Well, he had run his brewery into the ground and was loaded with huge amounts of debt. and he abandoned William Lemp Sr. basically the year he was born. He goes to Cincinnati. So you asked if he'd gotten divorced. That's an interesting question. I find some documents in a newspaper that were published that looks like his second wife basically got that marriage annulled because, or divorced. I'm not a legal scholar. Basically for abandonment. Like she basically published, announcements saying that he needed to return to her and continue being married to her. And what she actually eventually did was marry another brewer. And okay. I suspect that maybe this other brewer might have worked out some sort of deal with her creditors to acquire this brewery. And then she just disappears from the historical record. No idea what happened to her.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing if I ever have a chance is go to Germany and see if I can track down what happened to her.
That would be interesting.
It gets really fascinating because in Cincinnati, there is no record of Adam Lemp's third marriage in St. Louis marriage records. I mean, many different people looked. Many people were very skilled in looking up the marriage records at the Recorder of Deeds, and nobody ever could find any record of them getting married. Now back in Cincinnati,
so maybe they didn't get married on paper.
That's possible. Now in Cincinnati, I found a Roman Catholic marriage record and a civil marriage record of a woman who has the same name as his third wife and another man whose name is Jacob Wagner. Now, was that him getting married underneath an assumed name? Was he living in Cincinnati underneath a false name because he had fled from major debts in Germany?
Oh my.
It's an interesting question. I mean, it's her last name, one of her previous husband's last name was Deichmüller, which is that a very common German name? I don't really feel like it is. Right. So it's possible he got married to her underneath an assumed name in Cincinnati. But this is where it gets even wilder. You're going to love this. In St. Louis in 1840, around there, he and his third wife, Louise, buy a piece of property recorded in the Recorder of Deeds here in St. Louis. But then remember how the second wife is publishing legal notices saying that he has to come back and be her husband again. She does that after his third wife and he buy a piece of property together and represent themselves as being married. So he's probably guilty of being a bigamy. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's getting juicier and juicier.
And remember, she was married twice before. She had two daughters, Augusta and Matilda, from her two previous marriages. At least one of those marriages was back in Germany, and we don't really know where the second one was from.
Now, did she legally divorce? Oh, we don't know that either.
I have my hands up in the air if you can't see. We don't. So we only know of the existence of those two men's last names from an affidavit of a son-in-law named Henry Ferg that was decades later. He didn't even know these two men's first names. It was Fleissner and Deichmüller, and what their first names were.
Nobody knows.
I've tried searching out their identities. It gets even better because when these two young women get married, they ask on the marriage license who their fathers were, and they give their father's last names as Lemp.
Oh my.
But that's obviously not true. So they hid the fact that their fathers had a different last name. They presented themselves as
the daughters of Lemp.
Their patrilineal last names as being Lemp. They must, either show that they would obviously, Adam Lemp was a respected citizen of St. Louis. We can see the newspaper articles.
Right.
He was not a respected citizen of his hometown where he had fled from with huge financial debt. So, it could just be something innocent that they just wanted to be seen as a member of the Lemp family, or possibly they were embarrassed of who their fathers were. Don't know.
Possibly, but your bold-faced lie.
Yeah, it's inaccurate. It's a fallacy. Correct.
It's a lie. I mean, you know who your father is.
Right. It's interesting because the son of one of those two daughters, she and her husband actually died of tuberculosis, and he actually took the last name Lemp. His actual birth last name was Pfaff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually very interesting. In all the legal documents, he always says, Otto Pfaff alias Lemp, or, Otto Lemp, previously Pfaff. It's always very interesting. In legal documents, he always states that he has taken the last name Lemp, but his birth name was Pfaff. It's very interesting. Like, because he was raised by Adam Lemp, ever since he was like 5 or 6 years old, he basically took the last name Lemp out of, out of love for the fact that he'd been raised by him.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. This is almost like a really good soap opera.
It is a soap opera. Like I said, I don't want to reveal the exciting conclusion, because remember I said that there was that daughter from Adam Lemp's first wife who passed away from natural causes. She eventually has a son named Charles Browneck, and he becomes very important to the story at the climax of the book, and it gets really.
Oh, so I'm going to have to read it.
Yeah, you guys are going to have to buy the book and read it, because there's an exciting conclusion where he reappears.
My goodness. In separating myths from fact, did you ever feel like you were chasing a ghost through the archives?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I actually kind of really became emotionally attached to these people, just because these people had been totally forgotten about. This all began because I was interested in it, and I was encouraged by Stephen Walker. I really appreciate him being so encouraging. But also because it started with me looking at the Grave Finder website at Bellefonte Cemetery, which they are super friendly to visitors, researchers, etc. And Adam Lemp is buried with his third wife. So it says Adam Lemp. You can click on Adam Lemp, and you can click on Louise Lemp. Then there's like 12 or 15 more people in Adam Lemp's burial plot that don't have the last name Lemp.
Oh my gosh.
And those are all these people I've been talking about. These are all people descended from Louise Lemp's two first marriages. And then, as a lot of people who love the Lemps know, well, there's that mausoleum over on the other side of the cemetery. That's like a quarter mile away from where Adam Lemp is buried. And William Lemp and all of his children and, sons-in-law, daughters-in-law are buried in that mausoleum, along with his in-laws, Jacob and Elizabeth Fikert. But his own father's not buried in the mausoleum. And guess what? What if I were to tell you that Jacob and Elizabeth Fikert used to be buried in the family plot next to Adam Lemp? So guess what? William Lemp Sr.'s children moved Jacob and Elizabeth Fikert from the burial plot next to Adam Lemp, their own grandfather. They moved them over to the mausoleum, but they left Adam behind.
So was there some bad blood going on, or?
I think that's a fair
assessment.
Also, and this is Bellefonte.
So why did they? I mean, what was the bad blood?
I think it's because Adam had abandoned their father in Germany, and also had married this third wife. Yeah.
With that, okay. So,
and it gets even better. You're gonna love this.
A couple of people were not too happy.
You're gonna love this. There's a letter, and Bellefonte Cemetery has an amazing record. There is a letter signed by William Lemp Jr., the grandson of Adam Lemp, and it said, "Now that we've moved Jake and Elizabeth Fikert from the burial plot to the mausoleum, we're going to suspend paying the $5.95 a year to maintain the grass."
Oh my gosh. They really are not
He's
happy.
a millionaire.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, $5.95 was a lot more buying power back in the early 20th century.
Not that.
He's still a millionaire.
Yeah.
So I think you can kind of make some inferences. I don't like to make.
They were annoyed.
Yeah. So
there's a little annoyance there.
I think it says a lot. I mean, I think, hey, yeah, Grandpa, you can stay over there with your evil
third wife.
Yeah. And all of her stupid kids, I mean.
Yeah, I think I think it's a fair assumption to make.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Now, I've even talked about I haven't even talked about Adam Lemp's two business partners.
Well, let's talk about
do you
them.
want to? We've got time.
Yeah, we got.
Well, I mean,
Well, before we start that,
go
let me just do a quick radio. Stories build and breathe, and sometimes age like fine ale. I worked really hard on these radio identifiers. I want you to know. You're listening on KWRH929.com and KXOK102.com, and we're diving into the craft of words and memory with Chris Neffsinger and his book, historian and author of Adam Lemp and the Western Brewery. But yeah, let's talk about the. Well,
yeah. So it's really interesting. I think it's important to realize that the Lemps had help from these two other men. One was name was Louis Bach, and Louis Bach is really interesting because this guy didn't seem to have any problems. He was apparently completely opposite of like soap opera drama. He actually eventually was elected to be the treasurer of the city of St. Louis, and he had
no problems.
Right. That's what's crazy about it, is that he didn't have any problems. But something also I want you all to realize is that Germans in St. Louis were very pro-abolition and were very pro-union. And he actually was somebody who actually helped, the union during the Civil War. But let's talk about the other business partner. His name was John William Keckle. This guy had problems. He actually married one of Adam Lemp's third wife, Louise's daughters, Augusta. And she was like in her 20s, and Adam Lemp was in his 50s, and Mr. Keckle was in his 40s.
A September, December.
Is that what you call it?
Isn't that
June, December.
June,
December. Yeah. So it was kind of interesting. It was sort of like what would you call it? Like a business. Arranged marriage. Yeah.
Arranged marriage.
And
poor Augusta.
It seemed to work for a while, and they actually had several children together. And then Keckle leaves the brewery and starts his own dry goods store, and immediately runs up huge debts. He buys property down in South St. Louis, southwest corner of Cherokee and Jefferson. If you've ever shopped any of those stores, you're walking on land once owned by a business partner of Adam Lemp, and goes into huge amounts of debt, tens of thousands. And Louis Bach, his friend, steps in and kind of does this legal magic to get him out of debt. But guess what? They find John Keckle dead.
Oh, just dead. They find him dead.
Yes. Out around the intersection of what is now Arsenal and Jefferson, near what was known as English Cave, which was another beer garden. It was on top of a cave where they stored beer.
English and Arsenal?
English Cave.
Okay.
A Jefferson and Arsenal.
And what was the name of the street? Jefferson and Arsenal?
Yeah.
I want to drive by there.
Right, really close here. Yeah. It was out by there. It was out in the country at the time.
Oh my goodness. And it was just dead.
He was just dead. And this is where it gets really mysterious, because he came in as what we call a John Doe nowadays. And the Recorder of Deeds still has the book. They call them the Books of the Dead, or death records. And he was recorded. There were two men that died that day that came in as John Does. They just were unknown at the time. One of them, they didn't have a cause of death listed, and he was like in his 20s. And the other guy was listed as in his 40s, and it listed sunstroke.
Sunstroke.
Yes.
Was this June, July?
It was August. So anyway, I had his probate file, which is digitized by the Missouri Secretary of State, and I knew he died, but I couldn't figure out why. So then I started looking in German language newspapers, and I didn't know exactly when he died. And I tried searching by Keckle, but it wasn't coming up with anything. So do you know what I did? I searched for the German word for dead body, which is Leiche. And I found him that way. And I found it in a German language newspaper that he had gone missing. So they looked for his description of the way he was dressed in the coroner's records.
And that's how they
found him. Yes. And then he'd been buried out in the potter's field out by the psychiatric, the Arsenal and Sublette, out in that area. And he was re-recorded in the death records as his body found in the commons. That's not a cause of death. And it gets even more weird.
Was he murdered?
Don't know. This is where it gets really interesting. His probate file, Adam Lemp paid for an autopsy.
Uh-huh.
But there was nothing in the
no
probate.
Results.
No.
No
and
findings.
There was also
he was murdered.
And there was something in the probate file.
I'm going to start the rumor.
There was something in his probate file about them challenging the life insurance company was not paying out.
Oh. Huh.
So we don't know. Yeah.
Huh. He was murdered. I mean,
That's
come on.
think?
You know, sunstroke. You know.
You know, it's actually really interesting. I actually contacted the what is it? Not OSHA, the Federal Meteorological Organization. I forget what it's called off the top of my head. They don't actually have weather reports going back that far because I wanted to see if it was hot that day, and they didn't keep records back that far. But it was August in St. Louis. But yeah, I think something fishy.
Yeah, no sunstroke. I'm having a hard time buying it.
But yeah, I mean, it was suspicious.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And
but I guess Augusta was pretty happy about it at that point because I mean, you know, being married to a guy that's 1 foot on a grave and the other one on a banana peel.
So actually, what happened is she remarried to this pharmacist from Cologne, Germany. His name was Henry Ferg, and they actually did quite well. I mean, they owned a house like in the Shaw neighborhood, and he's the one who actually left an affidavit, a signed affidavit in the probate file of Adam Lemp's third wife. She actually lived for another 30 years.
Oh my.
Yes. And this is actually very interesting. This is something I actually haven't really talked about. In Adam Lemp's will, he required that William Lemp Sr. pay her a yearly stipend of $1,500.
And because
you can put that in a will. If he William Lemp Sr., if he were to inherit the brewery, which he did, he had to pay his stepmother $1,500 a year stipend for her living.
Wow, isn't that precious?
Yeah, which you're gonna love this. In the probate file, William Lemp had not paid the last quarterly installment right before she died.
Well, there was no love lost there either.
No, and she actually died intestate, meaning without a will, and she also was in a huge amount of debt. And she had actually been given a piece of property right by the brewery. Adam Lemp actually had built this really beautiful Italianate villa right next to his cave. And so for 30 years, William Lemp Sr. and his children had to walk by his stepmother and their step-grandmother's house every day with her living inside of it as they went to the brewery, which was rising up, right there at the corner of Cherokee and Broadway. Guess what they did the second they had the opportunity?
Tore it down.
Yeah, they snatched up that property out of the probate, and they tore it down a couple decades later. But actually, this is very interesting. I'm sure a lot of people who are fans of the Lemps, they actually might know about Billy Lemp, William Lemp Jr., and the Lavender Lady, Lillian Handlin. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of them. They were married and they actually lived in that villa.
Oh,
yeah. So all the stories about their tumultuous marriage and that ends in that very highly publicized and very well documented divorce, all of those events actually happened in Adam Lemp's old villa.
Oh my.
So they actually, I can tell you, they probably celebrated the day when they closed on buying that villa out from underneath the heirs of that third wife.
Oh. Yeah. So how hard was it to write this book?
The research was what was hard. If you do your research really well and you make sure you have your footnotes done really well, the writing comes really fast.
Right.
Yeah. When I was younger, I would always be really bad about footnotes and making sure I have all the citations done correctly, and then I frantically have to do them at the end. But when you do all your research and you document your research really well up front, writing is easy. I mean, I put everything in chronological order, and then it just kind of wrote itself. I mean, I think that's something, people who want to maybe do deep research, make sure you document your research really well. And then, it's more or less a chronologically written narrative, but there are tangents that I go off on. Like I talk about the brewery building, I talk about the cave, I occasionally talk about various business associates. It sort of talks about the world, the familial and, friendship relationships that he lived in.
What was the biggest challenge in turning years of research into a readable story? What was the biggest challenge in turning that into a readable?
I think the biggest challenge was just knowing when to stop. I think, and so I just chose the year 1870. So it starts in 1798 when he was born. And that's some sources say Adam Lemp was born as early as 1793. I went ahead and just went with what was on his gravestone. Now the guy, like I said, truth was sometimes flexible with the Lemps, but I think the research shows that 1798, what's on the tombstone, is probably accurate. And then I set 1870 as when William Lemp successfully seizes control of the brewery after his father's death. I kind of, I said, let's go ahead and stop there. And then, if enough people like this book, I'll be encouraged to go ahead and finish the story and go from 1870 up to like 1922.
When did he die?
Oh, Adam Lemp died in 1862.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's 64 years. That's pretty good for people back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How did the transition from historian to published author change your process?
As far as writing? Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I said to myself, is this something that people are going to want to read? I think I chose the Lemps because, first of all, I was really interested in them. And I also knew that this would be something that people wanted to read. There's lots of brewers in St. Louis. I mean, at one point in the 1880s, there were over 40 brewers in St. Louis. With all due respect to any descendants of those other brewers out there, there's still a chance I might write about your family's brewery. But I chose the Lemps because I knew that they were more marketable. I think does that make sense? I mean, I also am definitely going to want to write about the Falstaff story more, Anheuser-Busch, but definitely there's other families out there I want to write about as well. I think, transition from being a writer to publish, I definitely chose the Lemps because I knew that I already knew there was a market for them. I mean, Stephen Walker still gets lines out the door at the Fikert Lemp Mansion, as I call it.
Okay.
40 years
One last
later.
question. What do you hope readers remember most about Adam Lemp and the Western Brewery? Real quick, because we only got 2 minutes left.
Real quick, I consider him to be an everyman. All the people in these stories are just regular people who wanted to live a better life in America and left behind poverty and a really difficult time to live in Europe. And I think it's, I think we can relate to people who wanted something better for themselves. And I think, people like John Keckel, Louis Bach, Louise Lemp, these were all people that had rough lives. And I think I can relate to them. And, they did some stuff that maybe we wouldn't necessarily endorse nowadays, but we also have to think about what kind of lives they were living and how difficult it was back then. And I think they're people that we can really relate to.
Okay. Thank you, Chris Nefsinger, for joining us on Author's Edge. It's been such a pleasure exploring St. Louis history and the fascinating legacy of Adam Lemp. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out Chris's book, Adam Lemp and the Western Brewery, available now wherever books are sold. Catch Author's Edge every Saturday at 8 a.m. and Sunday at 7 a.m. on KWRH FM 929 and KXOK FM 1029, or stream us online at KWRH929.com, KXOK1029.com, and free apps like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and TuneIn. We're also heard nationwide Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. on the My Genre Radio. We will be back next week. More stories, insights, and inspiration. Our next guest will be Gary Warner, author of Musings of a Walmart Greeter, which I think everybody needs to hear. Till then, see you around the inkwell.